Four experienced divers descended into a flooded sinkhole near Mount Gambier, and only their equipment came back up. Their names were Stephen and Christine Millot, a brother and sister diving together that day, along with Gordon Roberts and John Bockerman, and all four of them drowned inside a single narrow tunnel more than 60 metres beneath the surface, after running out of air trying to find their way back out. To this day, they remain the only people known to have died inside that particular cave. And that single afternoon remains the deadliest cave diving incident ever recorded in Australian history. The cave is called the Shaft, and if you have never heard of it before, you are not alone, because this place has stayed almost completely out of the public eye for more than 50 years, hidden behind farmland in South Australia's quiet southeast. If this is your first time on Lost Australia, make sure you are subscribed, because we dig into places exactly like this every single week, the parts of this country's history that never made it into a textbook and were never meant to resurface at all. To understand why the shaft became so lethal, you first need to understand what it actually is. Mount Gambier sits on top of one of the largest limestone aquifers in the country, a bed of porous rock up to 150 metres thick that has been slowly dissolved by rainwater for hundreds of thousands of years. As that rock dissolved, it left behind an entire hidden network of caves and tunnels beneath the surface, some of them flooded completely. And where the ceiling of one of those caves eventually collapsed, it created a sinkhole, a sudden opening straight down into the underground water below. The shaft is one of these sinkholes, and from the surface, it looks almost unremarkable. A modest opening in a paddock that gives no hint of what lies beneath it. But descend through that opening, and the cave changes completely. The water is extraordinarily clear, since almost no sediment or organic matter disturbs it. And that clarity was part of what drew divers here in the first place, starting in the early 1960s, when the first cave divers in Australia realised what was hidden beneath this quiet farming region. By the time of the 1973 incident, it is estimated that around 8,000 individual dives had already taken place inside the shaft without a single fatality, which is part of what makes that afternoon so difficult to fully explain. This was not an unknown or unexplored site. It was a location divers had been visiting safely for over a decade. What changed that day was depth, inexperience, and a decision to go further than anyone had gone before without the safety measures modern cave divers consider absolutely essential. The four divers who died were highly experienced in open water diving, but had very little specific experience in cave environments. And caves demand a completely different skill set. In open water, a diver in trouble can simply swim upward toward the surface. Inside a flooded cave, there often is no direct path upward at all, only a long, dark tunnel that must be retraced exactly the way it was entered. That day, the group descended to around 60 metres before entering a narrow tunnel, eventually reaching depths of around 65 to 68 metres, all without laying a continuous guideline back to the entrance, which is now considered one of the most basic and non-negotiable rules in cave diving anywhere in the world. At that depth, nitrogen narcosis becomes a serious risk as well, a condition that affects diverse breathing, compressed air, under high pressure, dulling judgment and reaction time in ways that can feel disturbingly similar to intoxication. Investigators believe a combination of narcosis, low visibility, and the group's separation inside the tunnel led to panic. And once their air supplies ran low with no clear way back to the surface, there was nothing left that could save them. Their bodies were recovered over the following year, in an operation that permanently changed how cave diving is regulated in this country. Before we go further, I want to tell you about something that ties directly into stories like this one. I put together an ebook called The Timeline Lie, covering 15 sites across every state in Australia, where the official version of our history quietly leaves out details that are fully documented and peer-reviewed, but rarely spoken about publicly. If a story like this one interests you, that book goes even deeper into the parts of this country most people were never given the full picture on. The link is below this video if you want to take a look. The 1973 tragedy at the shaft was the incident that finally forced authorities to act. In the direct aftermath, the South Australian Deputy Premier at the time, Des Corcoran, announced the formation of a government committee to investigate safety standards for scuba divers in the state's flooded sinkholes and underground caves. Later that same year, the Cave Divers Association of Australia was formed, an organisation that still controls access to these sites today, requiring divers to hold specific cave diving certifications and follow strict permit systems before they are allowed anywhere near sites like this one. A dedicated underwater recovery squad was also established within the South Australian Police, a unit trained specifically to retrieve divers from environments most emergency services are never equipped to enter. But the shaft was far from the only tragedy in this region, and understanding the fuller picture is what makes Mount Gambier, as a whole, the deadliest cave diving region in the entire country. Between 1969 and 1983, 13 divers died across 6 separate incidents, all within a short radius of farmland outside Mount Gambier. 2 young divers, both only 18 years old and with almost no cave training, died at a site called Kilsby's Hole in 1969, after attempting to exceed the depth of a previous dive with equipment that had no gauges, no backup air supply, and no watches to track their time underwater. 3 more divers died in 1972 at a site that became known afterward as Death Cave, after the group became disoriented in a silted, low visibility chamber with no guideline laid to mark their way back out. Piccaninny Ponds recorded fatalities of its own across incidents in the early 1970s and again in 1984. If you are finding this as unsettling as I do, make sure you have subscribed, because we are only partway through what actually happened in this region, and what came afterward may be even harder to sit with. For more than 25 years following those incidents, the region held what divers considered a strong safety record, with the new permit and training systems appearing to have worked exactly as intended. Then, in March of 2010, a 52-year-old diver named Robert McAllister died at Kilsby's Hole after becoming entangled in a safety cable while diving with a friend, in an incident so serious that his dive partner was ultimately forced to leave him behind in order to save his own life. A local detective sergeant described the site afterward as one that had, in his words, taken lives before, but had gone almost 30 years without claiming another one. The following year, in 2011, 2 more divers died in separate incidents at Tank Cave, another major system in the same region, including Agnes Maloka, a marine archaeologist and highly respected member of the Australian cave diving community, whose death shook the small, tightly knit group of divers who continue to explore these systems today. What makes this region so consistently dangerous is not simply depth or distance. It is the combination of extraordinary clarity that lulls divers into a false sense of visibility and control. Narrow, disorienting tunnel systems that can trap silt into total darkness within seconds, and depths capable of inducing narcosis in even experienced divers who have never faced it in open water. Every single fatality in this region, across more than 50 years, traces back to some version of the same failure. A diver going further than planned, without the guideline, training or air reserves to make it back. And that makes the comparison to Australia's other legendary cave system all the more striking. Out on the Nullarbor Plain, the Cocklebiddy and Weebubby cave systems are widely considered even more extreme than anything at Mount Gambier, with underwater tunnels stretching for kilometres through total isolation, hundreds of kilometres from the nearest town or hospital. Before one major 1983 expedition, a doctor warned the diving team it was virtually certain someone would die or suffer severe decompression sickness attempting to push the known limits of the cave. That expedition went on to set a world record for underwater cave penetration at the time, extending the known cave system past 6 kilometres. And despite the extreme remoteness, the immense scale, and warnings from medical professionals before they even entered the water, no fatalities have been recorded at Cocklebiddy to date, which leaves an uncomfortable question hanging over Mount Gambier specifically. A region far closer to civilization than the Nullarbor. A region with decades of established safety protocols, government oversight, and a professional association built specifically to prevent exactly what happened in 1973. And yet it remains the site of more cave diving deaths than anywhere else in the country, spread across sinkholes with names most Australians have never even heard, sitting quietly beneath farmland that looks, from the surface, like nothing more than open paddocks. The shaft is still dived today under strict permit and certification requirements that did not exist before 1973. Access is controlled entirely through the Cave Divers Association, and every diver who wants to enter the site must prove specific cave certification before they are ever allowed near the water. Local farmers who own the land around these sinkholes have described a careful, ongoing relationship with the diving community, one built on decades of managing exactly how many divers can enter and under what conditions, in an attempt to make sure nothing like 1973 ever happens again. And yet the mystery at the centre of all of it has never really gone away. Divers who have been to the shaft describe a strange stillness to the place, a kind of silence that settles in once you pass beyond the point where daylight still reaches the water. Some who knew the 4 divers who died there have said the tragedy was almost impossible to reconcile at the time, since these were not reckless amateurs, but capable, experienced divers who simply pushed slightly further than the cave allowed. It is that thin, almost invisible line between routine and catastrophe that continues to define this entire region. And it is part of why so few outside the cave diving community have ever heard this story at all. The water is still just as clear as it was the day Stephen and Christine Millott, Gordon Roberts and John Bockerman entered that tunnel and never found their way back out. And somewhere beneath that quiet paddock, the same narrow passage that claimed 4 lives in a single afternoon is still there, waiting in the dark, exactly as it was on the day this country's cave diving history changed forever.